So good morning. My name is Maan and I made the exhibition we're currently sitting in and I made a book. The book is the bit more, it's bigger, there's more images, there's more text, there's more explanation. So I guess that's the more complete version of the story. But the exhibition is something I made in hopes of getting people to experience it a little bit. The location we're in is also kind of a wilderness. It's scruffy, it's unorganized, it smells a little. I don't know if anyone has noticed. But that's very similar to the places I visited. When I started, I actually didn't really start with this project. I have a fascination for the Japanese country, and I've been a couple of times, but I never went to the countryside. So I decided to rent a van and drive to the countryside. And I think within the first 2 days, within the first day probably, we were driving 1 or 2 hours south of Tokyo. I found the building you see over there, the white one, and it was very obviously empty. There's no front door in it if you look closely. We'll do a round later on. We drove past it. I said to my boyfriend who was driving at the time, okay, can we stop for a bit? Can we go see what this is? And while we were parked there, we found, we found it really was empty. And then we had the luck of another foreigner walking by. In Japan, in the countryside, there's not that many foreigners, so you meet once every week or so. But at that moment, there was a foreigner walking by, so we were like, hey, excuse me, what's going on with this house, or whatever it is? And the good man, to my utter amazement, just said, oh, well, I don't really know. I've been living here for 5 years. I have no idea. And I was like, okay, but do you know whose building it is? Do you think anybody would mind if I go in? Do you know any of the backstory? How long has it been empty for? And again, he was like, well, I've been living here for 5 years, but I have absolutely no clue. But he also said, well, since it's been abandoned, since I've been living here, I don't think anybody would mind if you would go in. So we went in, and it turned out to be a theater and a hotel. On the left side there was a hotel, the part with the windows, and on the right side there was a theater. And the hotel had been cleared out, like you'd expect a deserted building to be. But on the right side, in the theater, we found the benches, we found the stage lights, we found the decor still on the stage, we found the sound table for the sound, which really had cost a lot in earlier days. It was a really fancy one. There was booze still in the fridge. We also found a, calendar, so we knew it was deserted since 2013, because that was the last calendar that was hung. And we didn't really understand. The foreign guy had passed on or walked on by then, but we were like, what's this? And from that point on, we started noticing these deserted buildings everywhere. We had a month to travel around, and there are an immense amount of empty buildings in Japan. There's an estimated empty housing problem of almost 8.5 million houses. And that's just houses, that's not even hotels, theaters. We found factories, we found onsens like hot springs, we also went to Fukushima, which is also, that has a bit of a darker story. But there were so many deserted places. For me as a Dutch person, that was just completely surreal. In the Netherlands, we maintain everything, we fix everything, we break it down, we rebuild it, we maintain a grasp on everything around us. And in Japan, they don't. They're just like, well, we're done, let's go. So being a photographer, I took pictures, a lot of pictures. And I must admit, I got kind of obsessed with all these places. So every time I saw a house like that, I was like, we need to stop the car now! And then we went into another house. My boyfriend was getting tired of it at a certain point, because there are a lot of these places. And then a year later, in 2019, we went again for a month. And we pretty much did the same thing. But the first time we traveled all the way to Hokkaido, that's the northern island above the main island of Japan. And the second time we decided to drive down to Hiroshima, that's all the way in the south. And again, taking pictures. At that point, I didn't really have a plan with the pictures. I just knew I really love these places. There's a special atmosphere once you're there. You're stepping into a story, somebody's life, somebody's memories, and a lot of it is still there. And you never know what you find whenever you open a door. We've been encountering some very angry raccoons at one point. We encountered a whole paradise of rats, 4 rats, I should say. So you encounter all these things. But what you don't encounter are humans. In only one of all these houses, I found something that looked like somebody had made their home there after the original people had gone. And once I came home, I Googled a lot. Why are there so many houses empty? Why is there this amount of vacancy in this country? And then during Corona, as I think a lot of creatives had, I was like, maybe I should make it into something more tangible and share the stories I found with others. But I didn't want to take everything from Wikipedia, so I asked an actual Japanologist, I guess is the word, to write an essay about why there are so many deserted houses. She really specifically goes into the housing problem. And I'll note a couple of the reasons, but it's a very complex problem with a very broad spectrum of reasons, actually. One of the reasons is that the countryside, people are getting too old and there's not much going on, so people tend to move to cities. You can't get good education in the villages. You can't. There's not much work. There's not much people. Life is cheap, but if you can't work, it's still pretty expensive. So that's one of the main issues. There's, maybe one of you knows the word vergrijzing. In English?
Aging.
Aging. There's an immense aging going on. Like 1 in 4 people will be over 65 soon in Japan. So that's 25% of the whole population will be over 65. That doesn't help with repopulating small villages. It's a country prone to earthquakes. So older houses aren't very desirable to live in because there were earthquake regulations implanted in the 1980s. And everything before 1980s is seen as unsafe. Also a thing, in the Netherlands we build houses to last hundreds of years, and in Japan, if you live in 30 years in a house, that's pretty good. It's way cheaper to build a house, the land is way cheaper, so there's much more culture of abandoning the house after you've lived in it for a while. Which is a shame, and also kind of surreal for a Dutch person again. For them it's very regular, they almost don't notice the empty houses. They see them, but they ignore them. It's just something that's there. Where for me, it's really weird. And if you talk to a Japanese about it, they're like, oh, yeah, now you mention it. Yeah, but I guess it's the same with the bikes in the Netherlands. Once you see a foreigner being amazed at the amount of bikes, you're like, oh, I guess that's the same with the houses over there. Let me think. And of course, I should also mention the nuclear, the man-made, and the natural disaster that Fukushima was, that really rendered a big part of Japan uninhabitable. People had to vacate houses very in weird periods. There was a short first evacuation period, then there was a longer gradual evacuation period, then there was again a very sudden evacuation period. And people have been living for years in other parts of Japan. So there's one ghost village that they're trying to repopulate, but people have lived for 10 years or so in another place, so people don't really, they build a new life somewhere else, they had sent their kids to school there, they're not going to go back. So there's this whole area in Fukushima that's still, they're trying to repopulate, nobody wants to come back. Some people are still there. It's a very complex situation there. And it doesn't help that a lot of places like the supermarket, that image is of the supermarket, and that image over there is also of the supermarket. It doesn't help that buildings like that are still there, because it only reminds you of the decaying future there once was and has now gone. On the left you see the remnants of all the products that were thrown off the shelves by the earthquake. And this was also the encounter with all of the rats. This was a true rat valhalla. We came in through the office next door. The office had an open window. We were careful never to break in. We were always, we tried to get in when there was an open door or an open window or something that made it clear that it wasn't taken care of anymore, but we never broke in. And this had a very open window or no window anymore in the office. So we came in through the office and we waded through stuff there. It was very obviously a mess from the earthquake. And then we came in a dark in between. I guess that was where they kept all the provisions. And then we started hearing sounds and we were like, oh, hello. Are these homeless people? What's going on? So we tried to call in my best Japanese, Oyo, good morning, is anybody there? No reactions, but there were a lot of sounds. So we were like, okay, if it's not humans, then maybe it's animals. What kind of wildlife does Japan have? There's boars, there's bears, there's monkeys in certain areas, there's raccoons. Okay, so we both picked up an umbrella that was laying on the ground in case we might encounter whatever. And we walked in and it just turned out to be, once we got into the main hall of the supermarket, it was so smelly. I don't think I've ever smelled anything like that. And it was just, it turned out to be a population of, I think, hundreds or thousands of rats living there and feasting on the remains of the supermarket. But the smell was, the supermarket had of course been empty since 2011. We were there in 2018. 7 years of rat pee had gathered on everything. Anyway, when I, in Corona, decided to make a book out of this, my first idea was to make a book, to gather everything, gather all the stories, and make it into something that would translate. It turned out to be a bit of an art book. I don't really give any answers. I just ask you questions. I very intuitively have matched pictures. Some tell a story for me, but I've already heard from a lot of people they tell stories to others, which is amazing. I don't want to tell you this is how it is. I want you to think and wonder how it could be that such an advanced country, because Japan is one of the most advanced and wealthiest countries in the world, has all of this. And also, the Netherlands has very little of this. And for me, these places were absolutely magical. And I think we are missing something by not having places like this. Places where, or even like the place we're currently sitting in, places where we can have a bit of chaos, where it doesn't have to be polished. In the Netherlands, we're really used to cleaning, scrubbing, making everything perfect. And I really, really liked not everything being perfect. You wanted to hear something about making a book as well, so that's the next step, I guess. Last summer, I decided that I was really gonna make this book. It was an idea that was playing on my mind for a while. And I was like, I'll take a month, I'll go to Berlin, I'll do it in a month. Fine, if I have a whole month, it should be fine to do it in a month, right? No problem. I had thousands of images, so that was the first hurdle. What are you going to include in the book? What aren't you going to include? By then I also had the idea of wanting to do an exhibition to be able to take people a bit more into the experience itself. What are you going to include in the exhibition? Which images are strong enough to stand alone without having a context to tell a story in? I got completely stuck during that first month, like a terrible writer's block, a terrible creative block. I really was cursing myself. So after a month I came home with some ideas. I had chatted with a lot of creative friends about it. I had a first idea of what I was going to do, but I was still pretty stuck. And I think it wasn't until I sat with Jesse, who's also there, this guy, that I really got an idea of how I should combine the images in the book, because there's, you can tell a very journalistic story with these images. They're not edited, they are of journalistic value, they're pretty much what I found. But that wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to make people question themselves or in the situation and what was going on. So how do you tell that story? How do you make people wonder? I by then had realized that I wasn't going to be able to do this in a month and on my own. So I set out and I went looking for somebody that could help me with getting funding. Because if you want to make a project like this, you need money. I started a crowdfunding. I applied for funding from the government, from Hartenfonds, that's a Dutch book fund, art book fund. I applied it to some smaller funds, and I got a lot of them, thanks to my partner in funding, because I'm not very good at writing all those requests. I started working with a graphic designer for the book, and I really had researched this a lot. I've spoken to like 8 graphic designers before picking one, and then I got a first version and I cried because it was so far from what I had imagined it to be. I cried and I cried and I cried. I think I'd been upset for 2 days, and then I had to tell her we weren't going to continue because it really was, it was lovely, but it was not at all what I had envisioned. And I still don't know where in the communication she went left, I went right. I don't know. But then I luckily remembered Sharon, who is also a part of the CreativeMornings team, I guess.
She's in Marcel's.
Yeah, she's with Marcel.
She's in Marcel's team.
Yeah, she's in Marcel's team. Was also a graphic designer, and she reacted really enthusiastically. She really seemed to listen to my ideas as well, which was really good. So I had refound myself a graphic designer. It was also shitty, of course, because graphic designers cost money. And I paid the first one a bit for her first draft. But then again, thanks to Sharon, I think it really exactly turned out the way I wanted it to. And I'm really happy I trusted my gut and started looking for someone else last minute, which also because I set myself a time frame. I wanted to do an exhibition. I wanted to publish it in May this year. So I set myself a time frame that really put some pressure on it. But I think I would rather have postponed the whole book than to do it in a way I really wouldn't have wanted it to turn out. Once we had a sort of first draft, you start looking for printers. Printing a book, it's costly, there's a lot of options in the Netherlands, which is really nice. We have a lot of good print organizations. It's also something that if anybody here wants to make a book, please put everything on the email, please work with contracts, please don't believe anything they say on word value. They were very nice people, but they didn't deliver on any of their promises. Like I had very early on in the process decided on the kind of paper I wanted to use, and I'm really, really in love with the type of paper because it gives a lot of depth to the images. It's a matte paper, so it doesn't have too much shine, but it has enough depth to still have the images pop. And I was like, no problem, I can pay it in advance. I just want to really choose this paper. I want to reserve it, so I will be for sure happy with the paper. And they were like, no, there's no shortage, because there's an incredible shortage on paper right now, because everybody's making a book. I was like, I want to pay in advance. No, that's no need. This kind of paper, it's not that popular. No, there's no need. So, you can probably guess what's coming. The moment I finalized my design and went to the printer and was like, I want this kind of paper in slightly yellow, they were like, oh, that's sold out. Luckily, the paper was still available in white. So in the end, Sharon fixed it by making the paper, by adding 3% yellow to every page. But this sort of thing happened a lot with the printer, and from all the other photographers and artists I spoke to, this is a very common thing. If you make any, how do you say, if you agree on anything, make sure it's written down per email, because it will otherwise maybe not happen. Same with the test prints. They delivered me a test print in a different method of printing than the final book was going to be. So I had edited all my images to look perfect to the wrong kind of printing, which is completely irrelevant to the second kind of printing, which has, the first type of printing was digital. That's good for small amounts of books. If you print less than 500 books, digital printing is perfect. But if you print more, it's going to be offset printing, which is the traditional big prints with plates going in. It has nothing to do with each other color-wise, so that was a step back as well. That took me a lot of work and a lot of stress to, and a lot of money, because I needed to reprint all the tests I had done. So please beware of these kind of things, and feel free to ask me any questions if you have later on for the printing process. Early on in the process, I had also been talking to publishers, because publishing a book is something you do through a publisher, was my understanding. And while that is true, it's also, if you're making an art book on a smaller scale, a publisher is optional, I would say. I chose to work with a publisher because they have a good access to bookstores, and they will go to art fairs, try to sell your book there, try to make people aware of your book existing. They will send it out to bookstores, they will put it on bol.com for you, stuff like that. But if you don't have the ambition of being in bookstores, and you don't really have the ambition of doing art fairs, you might as well do it yourself. And by now, the most art books, you pay the publisher. The idea of the publisher paying you to make a book in the art world does not exist anymore. Unless you're a very big name, they might still invest in you. But if you're like me, a small artist making her first book, you have to pay them. Which doesn't mean it's bad, it's just something, if you want to make a book, to consider. Then for the exhibition, I applied for the funding of the government or of the municipality of Utrecht. And I got it, and one of their criticisms on my proposal was that I had a rather large budget for marketing. Because usually you have about 10%, and I think I had 20 or 25% of my budget set to marketing. Personally, I think it's necessary to spend more than 10% of your budget for marketing if you want anybody to know anything's going on. I hired somebody to help me with my online marketing as well as my PR, like press releases, sending press out and handling press, which I am really grateful for because for a small art book it got a lot of good coverage. Tomorrow I will be in the Trouw newspaper. And I personally, this place is kind of cool because people from the ping pong club will come and visit, but there's also a lot of people coming to visit specifically for my exhibition because I put out a lot of marketing. I flyered the whole area, put leaflets in all the houses around here. I put up posters throughout the city. If you don't do that, nobody's gonna know you're having an exhibition or have made a book. I think I could go into detail a lot more about any kind of specific subject, but maybe you guys have questions that might be handier. If you want, I can do a tour of the place as well, but maybe questions first, if there are any. Is there anybody here that wants to make a book? Oh, sorry, yeah.
You told us about going to Berlin.
Yeah.
And in that first month in which you were going to everywhere.
Yes.
Why Berlin? And what actually happened that month?
Okay. Berlin was mainly convenient because I have friends living there. And I wanted to be away from my normal setting in which there's also always work creeping in. If you're at home, there's also always something that needs to be done. While if you're away, I thought I'll immerse myself for a month in the book, which I did as well. I printed everything. I was busy every day with seeping through images and making connections, trying to make stories. At that point, I was still very much into a bit more journalistic mindset, so I was trying to make series or stories that really told a story. I talked to my creative friends there, and at the end of the month, I think in the second week, I was like, well, this is indeed a story, but it's not what I want. And then I had a creative block for at least another week, until I spoke to another friend, and she was like, but what if you combine it like this and this? And then I really started combining everything again. So I think that first month was mainly going to dinner frustrated, and during the day looking at images, rearranging, trying to find good combinations and good connections between the images.
Looking back on it, was it still valuable to have done that much?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think I really needed, and I think it was really a luxury to be able to take the time to get stuck and really find out what I wanted to make. Because you start with, I had the project, I had the images, but I hadn't had a clear idea of what I wanted to create yet. So for me, it was invaluable to still do it and still get stuck and still, do that thing. And it was also the period I Skyped with some photographers that had made a book. I tried reaching out, I started laying the groundwork I started researching graphic designers, I started looking into people that helped with funding. I started doing the groundwork. I think I just underestimated immensely how big the groundwork was.
And how did you find the person that was the funding person? I think a lot of creators need a funding person.
Yeah. Funding persons are pretty hard to find, usually. I Googled a lot, but this one came through my network, and I had worked with her on an earlier exhibition in which we fought a lot. So I didn't really it wasn't the first person to come to mind, but we did, afterwards we did a intake conversation, and she's just very passionate and so am I. So once we connected, we worked like magic on the whole project. She's now a good friend of mine. Yeah.
I'm not sure if it was mentioned. What was your background?
I studied journalism, which I didn't like, and I started taking pictures. I started out as a model, and I got kind of bored from just modeling because you don't have any say in the image. So I ventured through makeup and styling into photography because I really wanted to make the images. But I had a lot of friends that were photographers that helped me take those first photography steps, helped me set up studios, helped me, anything pretty much. How do you edit an image? And then I started doing photography more and more, and that really became my passion during my study of journalism. I started working at the Groupon studio. I don't know, like they paid 10 euros to get their picture taken. And it was my, my goal to make them buy extra pictures. I had to take such good pictures that they wanted to buy extra. I did that for a year or so. I had a new client every hour, but I really learned a lot from that in photographing humans, not per se what you're seeing here, but it really helps closely looking at people. It helped with my technique development, and after that I started freelancing. And also during the journalism study, I kind of decided I didn't want to do journalism, I didn't want to write. So I started renting a studio for myself because I had back then it was a studio shared with 5 other people. It was very cheap, very small as well, but it was what I could afford on a student budget. And I was like, if I want to do this, I need to practice, practice, practice. It's too early for those kind of questions. I found that I really love the possibilities of a book. You can tell a really nice story. It's a really good way to tell somebody a story, or to have somebody question something, or to give people more of an opportunity into your own thought process. So I think I will be making books, but I don't know about what or when or anywhere soon.
I don't know how much reflections you have on this, but you kind of touch upon this comparison also to how in Japan they have sort of these places and here in the Netherlands don't really have this. And what are your sort of conclusions or ideas about how these can inspire our society here and how we live here?
For me, personally, I would like, as I said, I would like to see more of these places. Then again, I don't know if that's very viable in the Netherlands. I spoke to a Japanese architect about the whole issue of these deserted places there. And he said in Japan, 80% is nature. So the humans are outnumbered by the nature by far. The nature is the reality. The humans are the fiction. We're there temporarily. And in the Netherlands, we don't have any of that. Even all our forests are managed. You can't go outside without always hearing traffic. I would love to see more of it. One of my personal reflections on it as well is that Netherlands is also a bit graying, like aging. I wonder if we will see more of this in the small villages. And I'm also wondering how we deal with it, because one of the magical things about these places also was that they're freely available. You can go in and people don't plunder, they don't destroy, they don't demolish the places, which makes them very intriguing and very beautiful, and they're not like the image over there, that's an office of an old factory. and there was a computer still there was a laptop still there was everything was still there. In the Netherlands, it would probably get stolen. So it's also a reflection about how we manage property. In the Netherlands, we think it's not somebody's, so we can take it. In Japan, it's much more, it's not ours or not mine, so I won't touch it. Which is a very big mind shift. And I would like to see more of that in the Netherlands, but I don't know if it will happen.